Hi folks, so this is the evaluation of Article 11. Now this came up in June 2022 on the OCR paper. It may come up again, but I perhaps haven't gone through this in quite as much detail. So first of all, I would talk about the fact that Article 11 is a qualified right. So there can be state interference, but your rights are protected because any interference has to be justified. It has to be proportionate. It has to be necessary in a democracy. So you are protected from too much interference by the state. And if they breach your rights, then you can go to court to claim that they have breached your rights. There is a link between Article 10, which is freedom of expression, and Article 11, freedom of association. So if you restrict one, then it's likely to impact the other, because if you restrict freedom of expression, then essentially, a protest is a way to express yourself. So you're unlikely to have Article 10 and 11. If you restrict both of them, or if you restrict one, what I'm trying to say is you restrict the other. So the right to protest is a fundamental part in our democracy. If there are restrictions, it kind of moves towards an authoritarian regime where the government can't be criticised. You can't show your distaste or displeasure in something that the government has done. So it's very, very important. We live in a democracy. You do have rights. The next thing I would talk about is it's challenging for the police. So when large protests are organised, and counter-protests sometimes, they have to police this. This costs a lot of money. It's public money that is being used. So yes, on the one hand, the right to protest is very, very important, but just bear in mind that there are issues with the police. They could end up kettling you. There have been cases when kettling has been quite disproportionate. So people who aren't even involved in the protest are caught up and they can be detained for hours. So there is actually a crossover here with Article 5 and your right to liberty and security. There have been a lot of high-profile protests recently, and, rightly so. So you've had the Black Lives Matter protests, you've had environmental protests happening, and, this has, a lot of it's been organised via social media, but again, you have the right to protest. It is important to let people express their views. It can lead to changes in government policy. So something that most of you will be too young to remember, but Mrs. Thatcher introduced something called the poll tax, and that was hugely unpopular, and it actually led to changes in the law and was one of the key factors in her resignation. The other thing I'd just be aware of is that UK domestic legislation does increase restrictions further. You've got a lot of public order offences, and the recent one is in April 2022. You've got the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, which is sometimes referred to as the Policing Act, which is trying to limit your right to protest. It doesn't like noisy protests. So it actually gives the police more powers to restrict your right to protest. And that, is a sign that the government is unhappy with people expressing their views. I would argue, well, what have they got to be worried about? If they can justify their laws, why not let people protest? We've got a lot going on in society. We've got the environment, the climate change crisis. We've got Black Lives Matter. We have racism. We have the police, the Metropolitan Police. You might have seen that report that's been out recently. There's a lot to protest about. There's a lot to get angry about. There's a lot of views to express. Do remember that, as another point, states have a margin of appreciation. So the more liberal countries are likely to allow more protests. So I think, it does depend which country you're in, which could be a little bit, unfair, but the ECHR allows states a margin of appreciation. So those are some of the key points for Article 11. Fundamentally, it is crucial in a democracy that we have the right to protest. Otherwise, we end up in an authoritarian regime. But let me know your thoughts, any comments, please, write them below.